you step back, we've been doing this place-making, monument-making thing for a long time. It's part of our human nature to want to mark the place. There have always been interesting conversations around monuments. Even when they were first being built, there was not a universal agreement that the monuments reflected the best of Richmond. And it reflected a certain particular point of view, but it was not the majority of Richmonders necessarily.
Free Republic! Free Republic! Free Republic! Free...
Every time we have these discussions about other statues in Richmond, people say, oh my God, I can't believe that everything has to be so controversial that everybody wants to argue about it. And we say, they've always argued about this kind of stuff. That's what you do.
Immediately after losing the Civil War, you don't start erecting monuments to your heroes. It took a while to work these things out. And for that reason, the earliest memorials tended to go up in cemeteries as places of mourning.
The obelisk, that's in Hollywood Cemetery, the sort of pyramidal form that's there, about 18,000 Confederate soldiers buried there.
They came along with things that were monuments that were sort of more pitching an idea and promoting a reason that they wanted people to understand about the war, a reason why it might have happened.
You don't think to be a part of the solution. I'm only here to educate you.
What are you doing?
It was really about Lee, right? What are we going to do? How are we going to memorialize Lee? And there were a number of competing visions for what that monument should look like and where it should be.
The first monument on Monument Avenue was the Lee Monument, which was unveiled in 1890. And Monument Avenue really barely existed at the time. There hadn't been any houses built on Monument Avenue yet.
It was chosen as an open site for the Lee Memorial in 1890 with the idea that actually it would improve the property values and help to bring about more tax revenues.
When they laid out Monument Avenue and thought about it as a housing development with this monument, this was the only monument they were planning at the time. They were looking both to the past with the monument and to the future and thinking of Monument Avenue as a real estate development that would attract investment to Richmond. After Lee in 1890, then it was 17 years before the next monuments were done, and two of them were done at the same time. The Stuart was unveiled at the end of May, and Davis was unveiled at the beginning of June during a huge Confederate reunion here in Richmond.
Followed by Stonewall Jackson, and then Matthew Fontaine Maury, 1929. And by then, in some ways, the monument building for the Lost Cause really had petered out.
The Lee Monument, I think it was very popular and easy to raise money. Then for the other monuments, it got progressively more difficult just as time passed. But the city would often give money. For instance, the Stuart Monument, the city gave $10,000 on the condition that the monument would not be put on Capitol Square, that it could be used somewhere else in Richmond. And they didn't necessarily mean Monument Avenue, but that's where it ended up.
I think that Civil War monuments are distinctly related to memory of the South, and particularly those who died in the South, and a memorial to some of the key leaders. What happens later is that the iconography actually changes. And so those friends and family and leaders in the community made the decision that if there was going to be someone on that street other than the Confederate and Lost Cause heroes, someone who could break that pattern, that Arthur Ashe would be the person to break that pattern. Because in so many ways he broke that pattern for Richmonders.
Arthur Ashe completely changed the conversation. Now, when the Confederate statues were done, they did have a consistent message, and it may have varied a little bit between the 5 statues. But when you get to Arthur Ashe, what Arthur Ashe was about was building a monument that represented the people who were making decisions in Richmond at that time rather than in the early 20th century.
Here we get to challenge these monuments to not the Civil War and not the Confederacy so much as to Jim Crow and the era in which they were put up and the reasons that accompanied their installations there. And so putting Arthur Ashe there became an extremely important statement for the city as a civic entity to make, that Monument Avenue can be about other things, that Arthur Ashe is not a bad selection for this, and that we basically get to sort of break the hold on Monument Avenue.
Arthur Ashe represented new voices and new ideas in Richmond, and so he was an important addition because it said that this is not a street about one idea, it's a street that represents the heroes of Richmonders, and it may be the heroes of Richmonders who are in power at the moment, but at least Arthur Ashe shows that power shifts.
Right now, it's presenting really one side of the story. It's a very complicated story, and there are some important aspects that are not being addressed at all. And one of the things that I look forward to is all the ways in which we, and by we I mean Richmond, can interpret Monument Avenue to the fullest and hopefully use technology to help with that, so that when people come to visit, they have a completely different experience than the one they've had.
Folks who were busy putting up these monuments, they called them shrines. They described them as, sanctified spaces, right? They meant it. And that is how they saw it. Now that language had to shift in the public over the years because other people were like, nah, this is not what they mean to me. And that kind of, we do not sanction the idea that those things are that precious.
Many times in the past, there have been discussions about the removal of monuments and the repositioning of monuments. And this is another one of those moments. I think it's an important one now, because it does allow Richmond to have some of those difficult conversations about the central nature of race in our history, and that these monuments are painful reminders of Richmond's role in slavery.
I think that Shockoe Bottom is our generation's Monument Avenue, and we are spending a tremendous amount of energy discussing Monument Avenue and trying to fix what we consider the wrongs of another generation while we are ignoring our own chance to make a statement. And Shockoe Bottom and the slave trade that happened in Shockoe Bottom is so important, and we need to be talking about it and making decisions about it at the same time, and hopefully we can do that.
Between 350 and 500,000 people were sold out of that one street. And yet there are very few markers there.
The Civil War was not about just noble soldiers fighting each other and then shaking hands and going home. It had to do with ending slavery.
I mean, this city was the second largest domestic slave trading market in the country. That affects every aspect of daily life. And it would be good to understand that. Because if you took a snapshot of the city, you would see all the people who lived here and who were living with the fact that slavery was an active and normal part of economic life in the city.
If you look at the landscape of the city, what story do we tell? And so that kid that gets up and gets on the bus in the morning to go to school, does that kid see the story we want them to know about themselves in the city? or a visitor who's zipping off of the interstate and coming in to visit Richmond and they drive into town, what will they think about Richmond if all they see is one street?
The idea is to, instead of leaving the monuments there for whoever to say, what is this and does it apply to me, to provide explanatory information, where they came from. At the time, controversies were involved, who did the sculpture and what it means. And doing that is not as easy as it seems.
There's been the suggestion, of course, of complete removal, which legally isn't really an option at the moment. There would have to be, legislative change to bring that about. There's been the option presented for selective removal and maybe just remove one. There have been suggestions about adding additional monuments, which I, fully support.
There are so many people who say, oh, you can't get rid of them because they're such great art. Maybe they are art, but they are also propaganda. And so if in fact you want to leave them where they are, you have to do some sort of explanation to say that now looking back on it, we look at these and we think, maybe there's something else we need to say about them.
I hope that the monuments remain and that we come to more fully understand them, and that everybody comes to more fully understand them.
They've had their lifespan. It's time to put them to bed or bury them or whatever. They came into being for a very specific purpose. They cannot serve that purpose anymore, so they should go.